Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to C4C Apologetics. It's been a little while since not only I made a video but done an interview, and so I'm looking forward to this one also. Today's interview, we're going to be talking about the book of Daniel, a lot of fascinating things within it, and we're going to be talking to the author of this book right here, which is a verse by verse expository commentary on Daniel called The Secrets Revealed. And so we have the author here with us. He's a great guy. He's a Christian. He's a husband. He's a father. I imagine he's a son as well. He's a former pastor. He's an author. You got a lot of hats that you wore, David. I mean, what else are you? Can you share a little bit with everybody and who you are and if you got any other hats that you're wearing that I don't know about?
Well, I've done some music stuff too. I started as a major in music in college and then switched to they call it religion in the school I went to, but because it wasn't really a Bible college, California Baptist College though. But so I still have in the churches I served in did music. Oftentimes, the song leader would quit and they would need somebody. And
Mm,
I had some training in that, and I'm available. So that's happened in a lot of churches. But
that's good to
and
know.
occasionally, if they allow such a thing, I also played guitar. And a lot of the churches didn't really like guitar. It wasn't really an acceptable instrument.
What kind
So
of guitar? Electric, acoustic, bass?
initially it was a classical because that's all I had. Then eventually I added an acoustic because that's better for song leading in church.
Mm,
Typically, the classical is just easier to play
mm,
as far as the strings and the width of the neck.
mm,
So I just preferred it. I still do. So I play both. When I was in another, there was one church we were in where they already had an acoustic player, and there was a bass guitar sitting on the stage that wasn't getting played, and so I jumped in and offered to play that as well. So
Isn't the bass guitar all it is like dong,
one note,
dong?
yeah. But I mean, my first instrument was violin, and then I went to piano, and then I tried to steal my cousin's accordion, but he eventually asked for that back. So I had a mandolin for a while, and I've tried banjo. That one, it doesn't like me as well. So.
That's funny. So you also have a YouTube channel as well, right? So can you share a little bit about that and what you do on there?
Yeah, it's called Barefoot Bible. And I had initially met over coffee with Pastor Danny to discuss the possibility of setting something up because I didn't know how to set up a YouTube channel at all. And so we had a great discussion, and with his advice to try to find a bigger umbrella
Hmm.
for sharing with people the books that I'm writing. Uh, I decided on the topic of biblical interpretation as being a real needy area in the church. And I'm not talking about any specific church, but I've been in several. And I recognize that folks are always encouraged to read through their Bibles, and that's good.
Hmm.
Where's the classes on how to interpret what you're reading? And then when you look at what you can take in college or seminary, and the books are too heavy and complicated, and so I thought, it needs to be kind of a little more bare bones, easy to understand, easy to apply kind of lessons on biblical interpretation. And so I chose Barefoot Bible as a theme because God made Moses take his shoes off, and then God gave him the message. And I think one of the needs in interpretation is treating the Bible as a holy book, like God sent that message to Moses right there in the desert. And if you treat it as a holy book, you're really not going to try to rewrite it and make it fit your views or your agenda. You're going to take it at its face value, let God say what he's intending to say, and then just try to seek that truth when you interpret. And so that's how Barefoot Bible got started. And we have a decent start on that now with, about 50 or so subscribers, and release a new video every Thursday. So I release one a week. Now we've kind of moved over to Daniel, since the new book got released November the 8th. So I've just thought, well, I want to promote this a little bit. Still from the context of biblical interpretation, since that's exactly what the book represents. And it's, you can find it if you bring up your YouTube channel and you put an @ sign, and then without any space, just write Barefoot Bible. You'll find that YouTube channel. Having a good time working every week on the next video.
Definitely. And we'll have a link in the descriptions of this video as well. So you just click on that link, hit the subscribe button over there, follow it, click the little bell thing so that you get notified when new videos drop. One thing I got to say, as far as this book is concerned, is I love the artwork. I love the way it looks and how it's written. It's very easy to read and understand. And so I definitely applaud you on that. As we're getting into some of these questions, I want to ask you right off the bat, how did you get into writing books? And since being an author, what books have you authored so far?
Well, it was an outgrowth of over 40 years of church work. And then my wife retired and COVID came. I was still wrapping up my last work. I was working with my son in his business in Pensacola. And so here I had like a month off, not planned, of course, because of COVID, but they had to close the office. And my wife said, "What are you going to do?" And I'd finished all the projects around the house. And I said, and she said, "Well, why don't you work on Revelation? Because you had said you wanted to write it." I taught it verse by verse, probably close to a dozen times in different settings. And so she challenged me and I got started on it. It took me a couple of years to get it written, but that was my first book that I wrote. It's called The Revelation of Jesus, which is part of the very first verse of the book. And it's also the theme, though, because in essence, the book of Revelation starts at the beginning with who Jesus was in chapter 1, but then it develops in chapter 2 and 3, where you get a little different picture. Jesus is present in the churches and sending them a letter and giving them warnings that they need to repent or he's going to come close down the church. Right. So, there's another picture of who Jesus is. And as you go through, you get to chapters 4 and 5, and suddenly, wow, Jesus is the lamb that was slain for us. And he was the only one able to open the 7-sealed book, and all of heaven stopped to worship him over that. And as you go through Revelation, you continue to see other aspects of who Jesus is. The entire book of Revelation was visions and revelations given to John to be preserved, all except for one. There was one that Jesus said, "You're not going to write that part." It's called the Seven Thunders. Yeah. Anyway, so there's one piece that was sealed until end times actually starts up, I guess. So I just had a great time with Revelation. And then we moved from Florida after both of us retired. We moved up to Alabama near Aaron and his family, since I have a granddaughter there as well. And I got finished writing Daniel after that move. And like I said, it got released November the 8th. It's on Amazon as well. And you can find either one of them if you use my first initial, which is C, and then put David Wright. Then you'll find both those books on Amazon.
And so that's why you got the C there, as you were saying, so that people can, because there's only like 12 John Smiths, right? I mean, it makes sense. C David Wright until you saw a million copies.
There's several other writers with my same last name that are pretty well-known writers. So I thought, okay, they need to be able to find me. And so it helps just to delineate a little bit.
Well, we'll see if we can't bump your numbers up and get you to be able to remove the C and just be the David Wright, just like the Miami University.
Oh, good luck on that. You're going to accomplish that? Well, I owe you a bunch of money.
Lord willing. So, this was a blessing. I really appreciate you giving me a copy of this book and reading through it. Like I said, I love the fact that it's easy to read, but it's got a lot of great information in there. And I think I know, at least reading it, partially the answer to this question. But on my bookshelf back there, I have at least 2 or 3 commentaries on the book of Daniel. So what do you think makes your commentary different from the others?
Well, and to explain that, I would mention, well, the easiest thing is it's called a critical text. So it's an approach to the Bible itself that kind of affects what kind of author you're going to be when you write a commentary. So there are those that are critical text in their commentaries, and then there's the rest of us that are not. So it's really kind of 2 boxes that you end up falling into. And most of the 2 most popular commentaries, as far as who buys what, are both critical texts. Like James Montgomery, he's written critical and exegetical commentary on Daniel. That's the name of his. So he tells you right up front what he is and what he's going to write for you.
Okay.
And then Leopold, he's also really popular. And now both of these guys are very detailed. You're just going to have to, it's like eating fish, enjoy the meat, but you're going to have to toss all the bones. And both of these kind of offer that problem for a good conservative Christian. But Leopold's exposition of Daniel also takes the same approach. Critical text, basically, that camp, they reject inspiration, they reject infallibility of the Bible. They're looking to kind of fix the manuscript problem all the time. So they don't accept any one particular majority text and use that. They automatically are going to be in a different camp than that. And therefore, they believe the Hebrew and Greek manuscripts have error in them. And the ones that, for instance, the King James writers used, they would say, they needed to be corrected. And so they are always looking for the original text and honestly never really finding it. So my approach accepts God's word as inspired and infallible, and it preserved, that God preserved it for us, even in the copies. Therefore, as a pastor, now a Christian author, I take God's word literally from word one. And I use scripture to interpret scripture. And you've got to do that, particularly with the symbolism that you find in Bible prophecy, and you find it in Daniel aplenty. And so, how do you interpret this piece of the statue versus that one? Well, in some cases, Daniel was the interpreter, and God was providing that interpretation for him to give to a king. Then later on, Daniel himself couldn't understand it, and God sent an angel on several occasions to explain it to him. So when it comes to the symbols in Bible prophecy, you need to use scripture to interpret scripture and be very careful. And then, like I said in the introduction there, avoiding in your interpretation, working in your own agenda, your own opinion. In other words, coming with presuppositions, which all of us have, but you're forcing meaning on scripture that's really not there. And that's not fair to God, that we're outside of his intentions. So I wrote Daniel and Revelation to make that which seems to be complicated, but with the right study can be made understandable and somewhat simple. And like in the book of Daniel, I have nearly 1,000 cross references in there. I want you to do your own study and not just rely on what other people have written. And then there's 23 special studies, and you'll find them when you turn to the table of contents in the front. The special studies are all in italics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like the first one says, the secret of purpose is what name I give to chapter 1. And then there's under it 3 special studies: the 3 sieges of Jerusalem, idolatry of Babylon, and does Daniel 1 support a biblical diet? Those are all special studies. Again, because I want to encourage folks to read more. Don't just read through Daniel, but do the extra study that makes us good. What's the scripture say? That study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed.
Yeah.
It just takes a little more work. And then I also in the bibliography in the back, it's an annotated bibliography. So at the end of each explanation of how to find that book in a library or how to order it yourself, there's some bracketed material. And inside those brackets, you'll find my opinion about the book, what kind of book it is, perhaps, or if it's conservative, or maybe it's not conservative, and that can help folks that are looking to add books to the library. I meet them all the time.
That's definitely a good help, because like on different groups that I'm a part of, I'll see someone post a link, be like, has anybody read this book? Anything I should be worried about? Things like that. So annotated bibliographies are definitely great. In the very beginning of the book, it's sort of like the preface. When you get to about the book, I love how you start. It says, Daniel is the most attacked book of Old Testament prophecy. Why do you think that is? And can you elaborate on why you believe it's the most attacked book of the Bible, of the Old Testament prophecy?
Well, critics question, it seems they question everything about the book of Daniel. And I'm not sure exactly when all of it started. Part of it had to do with chapter 5 in King Belshazzar, who wasn't found in extra biblical records anywhere. And in their records, it was a guy named Nabonidus. So everybody thought, well, see, the Bible has error. There's no record of Belshazzar even existing. Well, so that was one form of attacking, like the historical facts that were in Daniel. And it wasn't until 1854 when they actually discovered some records over in the city of Ur, where Abraham was from, actually. And it was in a temple to the moon god. I love their name for the moon god. They call him Sin. But the moon god, anyway, the temple, in the foundation of it, they found 4 clay cylinders. And sure enough, one of them is a prayer to the moon god for a blessing on his son, his only son, Belshazzar. And then part of the other records finally fill in that gap and tell us more about how Belshazzar became king. And we can talk more about that. But they basically another big attack that critics do is rejecting the authorship of the book of Daniel. Now, you and I would say, well, it's got his name right in the beginning, and he dates everything. I don't see any problem with Daniel being the author. Mm-hmm. Well, but if you want to attack this book, and there's a reason behind it, but if you want to attack the book, one of the things you need to do is attack the authorship. And Daniel wrote his book back in the 6th century BC, which is well before there's hundreds of prophecies in the book. Mm-hmm. And if Daniel wrote it back in the 6th century BC, well, then his prophecies are rather miraculous, because they are so accurate. It's embarrassing to any modern day prophet who is likely to be 50% correct. So they attack him and they say, well, no, it was really a 2nd century guy who used his name, which means he's a fake. He's also lying. So a 2nd century guy uses the name of Daniel and wrote the book in that time frame when most of the prophetic historic events had already occurred. And that's why this fake Daniel could invent all these dozens and dozens of prophecies that are so accurate. So that's one way they attack. They even attack grammar in the original text and say, well, these kind of words are more second century words, not 6th century ancient, either Babylonian, Chaldean, or Hebrew. And so they like to attack that. They even take in King Nebuchadnezzar's list of all the instruments. When you hear the sound of this, and this, well, the last two are Greek instruments. So they use that and say, well, see, the Greek wasn't even a full-fledged nation until like the 2nd century. So by then, it became a national of national importance. But did that early on, so there's because of the types of attack on it, and I didn't explain yet why they attacked. I think the motivation really is a basic one. They reject the supernatural. Mm-hmm. So they're people who are okay with the Bible as long as you leave out all the supernatural. Mm-hmm. Which rejects now Jesus' resurrection, by the way. But many of Daniel's hundreds of prophecies are already fulfilled, and they're fulfilled with such accuracy. It is nothing short of supernatural. No one had the information that Daniel provided. And the few unfulfilled prophecies really go hand in hand with Revelation. They call Daniel the sister book of Revelation in the Old Testament, like the prophecies regarding the Antichrist, prophecies regarding the second coming and the eternal kingdom of Christ are all in Daniel. Mm-hmm. It takes you that far. And so for unbelievers and honestly, critics of the Bible, 99% of them are unbelievers. If they accept Daniel's prophecy as truth, they got a real problem, because now they're forced to accept Jesus' resurrection as a possible truth. They're forced to admit things in eschatology that apply to the revelation must also be accepted as possible truth. So, Christians really need to learn apologetics, because our faith is attacked. Our Bible is attacked from a lot of different directions. And, Daniel seemed to catch more than his share. Genesis is actually another book that, since evolution was invented, it fell under a lot more attack. Because it was foundational.
It does make sense, especially once you get into Daniel chapter 11, I believe it is, and it talks about the breaking of the Greek kingdom, going to the 4 generals, and Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucid, and Ptolemy. And the main emphasis is on the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires, and those are the ones that gained prominence within Macedonia, Greek Empire as well. And just, to me, one of the things when I first studied out Daniel that really fascinated me was the marriage union between Antiochus and Berenice, which is recorded in Daniel chapter 11, that the king of the north would make a peace treaty, if you will, with the daughter of the king of the south, Ptolemy and Seleucid. It's like, wow. I mean, so it's, people ask, if there's one book of the Bible you'd give a skeptic, what book would you give it? A lot of people say John, obviously, because it's the most evangelistic book of the New Testament. I say if it's a critic, it would be Daniel, because it's got so much fulfilled prophecy. And so I got a question for you. Your book here, is this written sequentially, first chapter after second chapter after third chapter? This is written in order of the book of Daniel, right?
Correct.
But is the book of Daniel written in the same fashion? Is it written chronologically, or how is the book of Daniel written? Is it different?
Well, the seminary answer, when I went to seminary, they said, well, the first section is semi-chronological, Daniel's records of what happened with Nebuchadnezzar and then Belshazzar, although there's a big gap right there. And then on into the fall of Babylon, which comes up with Cyrus the Great conquering the place and it becoming a Persian kingdom, and then Daniel shows up there as well. And then when you pick up like in chapter 7, he takes a totally different approach. They're all just records of visions that Daniel personally received. He still dates them during such a year of such a king. So he received them during his time serving the kings. However, they're not written about in the first section. And some of them they kind of duplicate what the message the king got. And you find out, well, Daniel also received some information about those same topics, but from a different perspective. Instead of a statue, it was some beasts, that kind of thing, but about the same themes. So like many prophetic books of the Bible, no, it's not really chronological. Tractor Supply, goofy things show up on your screen.
I like that.
Yeah. Throughout Daniel, he dates things according to the current king. So in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, he was king over in Jerusalem. Well, they call him king of Judah because the northern kingdom had fallen already.
Divided, yeah.
And then if you study verses referring to the king throughout, well, you find out it doesn't continue to flow chronologically. So in chapter 1 is dated the 3rd year of Jehoiakim. That would be 605 BC. Chapter 2 is dated the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar. So that's about a 2-year jump. And then the next chapter chronologically, so if you're going to go chronologically, you'd have to skip 3, 4, 5, and 6 and jump to 7. Mm-hmm. Now you're chronological because that's the 1st year of Belshazzar, which is 554 BC. So if you're going to go date wise, that's the next chapter chronologically, date wise, because it's very early in the Babylonian structure. Well, anyway, so the simple structure, like they gave in seminary, was chapters 1 through 6 are recordings of the dreams and visions of the kings, and Daniel being called in to interpret them. Chapter 7 through 12 providing Daniel describing dreams and visions he personally received, and angels usually provided the interpretation to that. Some suggest the first part is more historical, and the second part is more prophetic. Although when you say that, you got to stop and admit, well, chapters 1 through 6 have a bunch of prophecies in them also. So the answer is no, it's not. It's not terribly chronological, and neither is Revelation. You have to there's some jumps in there. There's parenthetical material that's stopped and wedged in. So you run into that with prophecy.
So that's important for the reader to understand when they're trying to read through the book of Daniel or study it or whatever the case is, to understand that, chapters 1 through 12 aren't sequential one right after the other, but in-depth biblical interpretation and study, like your whole purpose of Barefoot Bible is to go ahead and understand, put these things in order, and then you can really see a very good flow from that chronological Western mindset. To me, it seems like Westerners, we are just linear, whereas over there in the Middle East, they weren't as worried about linear or chronological. A lot of times it was thematic, I guess. Like you're saying, I think you wrote in the book that chapters 1 through 6, they say historical, and 7 through 12 are apocalyptic or whatnot. So, it's important for that information. I want to point out a couple things, some things I personally love. On page 29, you reference Berosus, I believe it is, in 3rd century BC, his historical works. I'm just going to jump around to 3 places real quick. And then on page 52, you refer to Oppert's report in the 1856 Journal of the Historical Society. And then on page 79, you also reference some other archaeological and historical information. You talk about archaeological excavations in Babylon have brought forth inscriptions which tell of Nebuchadnezzar's great building activities. The thing I really love about this book, something that resonated with me, is how much historical and archaeological information is in this commentary. And you've definitely done your homework as far as finding out who said what and where's the resources references coming from. Why did you choose to include that information?
Well, of course, commentaries are in the interpretation realm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a commentary is all about. It's
Yeah.
someone taking their time to help interpret the book so we can understand it better. And the historical background is necessary for a lot of material in Daniel. We're talking about the 6th century BC, and we want to put it in the right time frame. It's helpful when there's a controversy over dating of things, that he uses that the year of such and such a king as his method. And he's not the only one that used that. Several writers use that. Yeah. Many of the prophecies that he wrote have been, like we've already said, very accurately fulfilled during the reigns of kings who came after Daniel wrote. In Belshazzar's day, Daniel was a pretty old guy. And the Greeks weren't even a major kingdom yet. So, he goes from the Babylonian to the Persian to the Greeks to the Romans. And then on, there's prophecies to go well beyond that. And so the extra biblical records verify the accuracy of the prophecies that are in Daniel. That's important for us as believers. And then the ancient histories by men like Herodotus, Josephus, who was a Jew, and even current Jewish histories. I use Paul Johnson's and Max DeMont's. Both the two guys take very different approaches, and that's why they're interesting to look at both. And those current Jewish histories again validate other aspects of the Bible. So you want to just what's their approach when they look back at their Old Testament history, and they have a very Jewish mindset. So it's important to grab that. As far as archaeological evidence, I had a couple books. I added several others when I wrote the book of Daniel. They provide, again, extra biblical material. So it's outside of the Bible, and it's about the people and the places and some of the events that are in Daniel. And so, there's not one book you can buy that just has the archaeological of Daniel. You have to. It's called biblical archaeological studies, and they support details regarding, for instance, Nebuchadnezzar built the statue and tried to force Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to bow to it, and they refused. And praise the Lord for those guys. There was an archaeologist who actually spent years studying Babylon area all around and made detailed notes about how it's laid out and what he believes. Here's where the Tower of Babel is located. Here's several of the towers around the outside, and here's evidence of an inner wall within Babylon. And so he discovered many wonderful things, and this was many years ago. But he spent about 20 years. One of the things he discovered, though, was in the plain of Dura, which is south of Babylon proper. He found in the rubble this huge foundation and of what would have been a statue. And it was in the plain of Dura. It's huge. It's a foundation that they would have put a statue on. And of course, that supports Nebuchadnezzar and either the statue of himself or of one of the gods. We don't really know. That was discovered. So that was very cool. In 1854, Nabonidus, I already mentioned that Nabonidus clay cylinders were discovered in the ruins of the temple to the moon god. And it validates Belshazzar's existence. Sorry, we didn't believe he existed, but it validates that, there he was and the only son. And when Nabonidus was away from the capital, he appointed Belshazzar to be his co-regent and run the capital for him. And according to history, again, extra biblical material, Nabonidus spent a lot of time down in the southeast trying to defend territory he'd conquered. And he set up a temporary capital down there. And when Babylon fell, Nabonidus was the first that was conquered by Cyrus. And then the capital city, which was much more fortified, it was incredibly fortified, was the latter part of conquering Babylon. And of course, that happened when Belshazzar was in the palace having a party. Anyway, so the details of chapter 5 are largely now uncontested by critics of the Bible. Now, there's a few that don't admit that's been discovered. They kind of just leave it out. And that supports their approach. So for archaeology, I used a book by Kennedy called Unearthing the Bible. Excellent book. And then there's archaeology in the Old Testament, a book by Hirth. And he does it great detail, a lot of good quotes in there, right off the material. So both of them done a great job.
So are you talking about Titus Kennedy?
Yes.
Do you know Dr. Bryant Wood? Have you ever read his stuff?
I'm familiar. Yes.
Okay. Do you recommend him too?
I haven't bought it, so I don't know if I should give a recommendation.
He was the first one that I found out about the charred grains of Jericho and evidence that supports Jericho being found and the stones that caved outward and stuff like that. It was fascinating discoveries. I think he was the first one that I've read about it.
I actually have a book. Is it right here? If I can grab it. No, I think I've got it in my shelves. I found a archaeologist who discovered Sodom and Gomorrah. He discovered the ruins of Sodom, and it isn't where you think. You know, the old fable that was down under the Dead Sea. He said a lot of people have disproved that. You know, that's not realistic. That's not where Sodom was. You got to read the biblical description and look at every word, and you can locate the correct area.
Yeah.
And he did. He went there, he took a team, and they dug around, and they found the existence of the fire falling from heaven in the area, and the destruction of what was equivalent of a very major city. And I got the book so I can have, oh, wow, you know, I love this. Discovery. Yeah, archaeologists, you know, most of them are not Christians. They're just scientists. But they, you know, not a month goes by without them discovering something else that proves the Bible is true.
So are you saying you don't have a blind faith? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, let the facts speak for themselves. And eventually, you know, one of your questions is about something that it's coming up. One of your questions that you sent me is about something that we haven't proved yet. And eventually some archaeologists will dig up proof of this guy too. So we just wait.
Well, when you're collecting all this historical and archaeological information for the book, for your commentary, what was the most fascinating find that you didn't know before that you discovered through putting this book together?
In the archaeology, let's see. Well, if I'm answering your question generally, you know, when I dug into chapter 1, I was wrestling with, did Nebuchadnezzar really turn Daniel into a eunuch? And the more I read and the more I dug into it, there's some experts on things that say, you know, not so sure. And there's others that say, well, you look at all the wording that's describing it. Daniel wrote it. They were assigned to the prince of the eunuchs and trained up by him, and trained for service in the palace, which would be near all the king's non-wives. So they turning foreigners, particularly into eunuchs, was not an unusual thing. And so that was one of the things I was kind of convinced that, yeah, Daniel and his friends were made eunuchs. Some Christians, and there's books out you can buy called Daniel's Diet. And some have taken Daniel's requested diet, where he asked permission not to eat the king's meat and drink his wine, and the pulse that he asked to be able to make his diet. And they've turned that into a biblical diet. And I have a special study on that in chapter 1. Is
Yep.
it really a biblical diet? And I just take you through the Bible talking where it does talk about diets, and
Yeah.
and there's some principles in the New Testament, particularly since that's the era we live in still.
All right.
The church is a New Testament entity, and so I suggest that. Well, I'll let you read it, but I do give you a little bit of opinion on that. Then I was kind of really pleasantly surprised. Chapter 11 is huge. You mentioned.
Yeah.
I think that was before the call. I took 2 chapters on chapter 11 because it's such a long chapter. So there's 2 chapters in the book on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some material in verse 17 and verse 25 of chapter 11 that actually refers to someone everybody's heard of in history. And her name was Cleopatra. So I was pleasantly surprised and fascinated to find Cleopatra in Bible prophecy. That's kind of cool. So if you want to know about that, buy the book, huh?
How about verse 17 of chapter 11, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And then verse 25, she comes up again.
Yeah. Give him a daughter of the woman, corrupting her. She will not stand on her side. It's fascinating. Yeah.
So both of them refer to Cleopatra through some marriage issues that she fulfilled. And then also I was fascinated by, I had never really looked into ancient Aramaic. And chapters 2 through 6 are written not in Hebrew like the rest of the Old Testament, but they're actually written in ancient Aramaic. Yeah. Sometimes it's called Chaldean. And what was a pleasant surprise was I discovered the ancient Aramaic uses the exact same alphabet as ancient Hebrew. Now, that doesn't mean they were the same language, because they use totally different words. They just happen to share an alphabet. And there's some information on that in chapter 2 of the book as well. So that's, if you learn to write in Hebrew, it starts to the right and works to the left, by the way. And it's rather symbolic looking, picturesque, rather than looking like letters. The ancient Hebrew and the ancient Aramaic are identical as far as the alphabet.
So interesting. Yeah. Well, you alluded to this person, I believe, probably. Next question is Darius, Cyrus. I've heard arguments. I've studied it myself personally when we taught through the book of Daniel. Sometimes people say Darius is just the name or title for, since it was a Medo-Persian combined kingdom, that was his Mede name, whereas Cyrus was his Persian name. What are your thoughts? Are they 2 different people? Is it a title? Who's Darius and Cyrus here?
And of course, we're going to chapter 6 in Daniel when you meet these guys. And I know Darius comes up again later, but we can't be certain of the identity of King Darius. And the way Daniel wrote, Darius and Cyrus are both mentioned in one verse. I think it's at the end of 6. And therefore, the way they're mentioned and listed in that single verse by Daniel suggests they are 2 different people. I do lean towards Darius just being a title. So in a way, I kind of like the theory. Well, is Darius just a title and Cyrus, a name, and one being a Mede and the other being a Persian? Because there's a lot of truth in saying just that. Darius is called Darius the Mede. There was another Darius, though, in the Bible, and he comes later. It's not the same guy. This Darius only ruled a couple of years over the conquered Babylon. So he doesn't last long as far as being in the Bible picture. And then I said, like I said, there's another Darius that comes up, and he is also a Persian, but he comes later. So there's several theories, and that's really all I can leave you with, is that they're theories. In chapter 6 of the book, I do I do suggest that, well, before I get to the suggestion, on the King Cyrus cylinder, so there's another clay cylinder that was discovered, written this time by Cyrus the Great. On one of his cylinders, he explains that he had appointed a guy named Gobrius. Another way it's also written is Gubaru. My wife thinks that's a hysterical name. I don't know what's so funny to her. She loves that.
Gubaru.
Yeah, like a Subaru, that you drive, but this guy's got a Gubaru.
I think of Gugon.
There you go. Oh, yeah, I've heard that too. I've seen that movie. He's the Gugons are in. Anyway, that Cyrus says he appointed this Gubaru as the governor over conquered Babylon. Well, that kind of fits who we're looking for. It's well, who did King Cyrus put over it? At least for a couple of years, and that would have been after Nabonidus and Belshazzar got defeated. So as soon as we have the extra biblical evidence, that was discovered in March of 1879, and it kind of supports that there's this Guru guy involved somehow, and we don't read about him in the Bible, though, but that's okay. So that's extra biblical. And if Darius is just a title or throne name, then his real name may have been Guru. Maybe he was embarrassed about it. He didn't write about that.
Embarrassed about it. They had some interesting names back then.
I didn't want my wife laughing.
So now to get into really some of the meat of this interview.
And you taught about this at church, so I appreciated when you taught about this at church, because you kind of waited. Yeah, that was great.
Hopefully I didn't say anything wrong, but 70 weeks of Daniel. Daniel chapter 9, verse 24. 70 weeks are appointed. What are the 70 weeks in Daniel chapter 9? And then just a couple verses later, there's a reference to a prince that comes. There's quite a debate on who this prince is in Daniel 9:26. So can you elaborate what is the 70 weeks of Daniel and who is this prince that's going to come in 9:26?
Like I said, this wades in a little deep. So it's not as simple to explain. It takes a minute. The 70 weeks appear, of course, as you said, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24, 25, 26, 27. So 4 verses take us through the contents. That means that's part of why it's not a short explanation. The angel Gabriel is the one speaking in all 4 verses. He's interpreting to Daniel the meaning of a vision. And this material, the 70 weeks, we call it, of Daniel, is significant to eschatology, study of end times or last things. So the understanding of these 70 weeks in the 4 verses does deserve, some explanation. We want to understand it so our eschatology is good. 70 weeks in this context refer to 70 times 7, which is the reference, and or 490 prophetic years. And because of the wordage in the original, it can be interpreted several ways. That is where we land on it because of the events described. So this prophecy occurs within a timetable, the scripture says, determined or decreed by God. So it's not us, it's prophetic timetable. The vision of the 70 weeks, according to verse 24, specifically pertains to a group, because he says it pertains to, he's talking to Daniel, it pertains to thy people and thy holy city. So we can break that down pretty easy, because that is the Israelites and Jerusalem. So we can fill in the blanks pretty well on that one. If everything else was as easy, to be great. According to verse 25 now, the 70 prophetic weeks have a beginning. We can figure this out now, because it says it begins with a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. All right, that doesn't happen until Ezra and Nehemiah's day. And so there, you want to then figure out, well, which decree was it? When was it given? All right. And the book provides details about the 4 decrees and who gave them. 3 of them were Persian kings. Well, the 4 decrees, one of them made 2 of the decrees. That's why there's 3 Persian kings. Mm-hmm. And they command or decreed various aspects of rebuilding. And in verse 25, my notes on verse 25 provide you all the details. The mm-hmm. final decree came from someone we know from the book of Esther. His name was Artaxerxes. So he's a Persian king, Artaxerxes. He gave a decree in 445 BC, which ordered the rebuilding of the wall around Jerusalem. And everything else had been decreed. This was the last aspect. And Artaxerxes fulfilled that in 445 BC. And Nehemiah was the one involved in that project after a great deal of fasting and prayer. Anyway, verse 25 also prophesies the coming of Messiah the Prince, and 2 important events in verse 26, the crucifixion, he uses the term Messiah be cut off, and then the destruction of the temple, where it says, this prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that's 25 and 26, just a quick run through. Verse 26 also mentions the people of prince that shall come, which you had asked about. So we want to stop and park for a second to help determine who that prince is. Daniel wrote chapter 9 in the first year of Darius, it says, right? Gubaru, whatever you want to call it. So the first year of Darius, we can figure out that date-wise, that was 537 BC. And regarding the question of his identity, the prince that shall come, Rome did not become an empire until the 1st century. And the prince that shall come, it says, is the one who destroys Jerusalem and the temple. Okay, well, that didn't happen until 70 AD. So you can either refer to the Caesar who commanded it, or the general, that was General Titus, who fulfilled it. And he carried out the destruction of Jerusalem. He carried out the destruction of the temple. It was burnt with fire, exactly like the prophecy said, in fact. All of that occurring in 70 AD. So it doesn't say king there. It says the prince that shall come. So I kind of lean toward the general, more like the role of a prince, and lean on Titus rather than the Caesar who ordered it, as who probably is that prince that shall come. I do leave it open to other experts to correct me. I'm quite open to that. Anyway, following the prophetic weeks that we're given in Daniel 9, if we start in 445 BC and then move forward in time, following the weeks that he gives for each section, we actually stop at 32 AD as the year of when Messiah the Prince would be cut off, or Christ would be crucified. And that's an interesting time frame when it lands right there at 32 AD, because that fits pretty close to what we believe about when he was born and so on. And he served, his ministry for 3.5 years. The end of verse 26 has another interesting prophecy. Unto the end of the war, it says, desolations are determined or decreed again. This prophecy, most agree with me now that this prophecy suggests a gap between the crucifixion, which was mentioned before this, and then the Antichrist, which is coming up in verse 27. So it leaves us with a gap there. Unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. That gap is there, and probably allows the time frame which we currently live in, waiting for Christ's resurrection, or Christ for us to be caught up, the rapture, and then believing that the Antichrist will then rise shortly thereafter. So we fit in that gap. And then the final week of the 70 weeks is down in verse 27. And as many other verses in Daniel do actually refer to the Antichrist, that verse does there in verse 27. So the 70 weeks, prophetically, they align and confirm the chronological flow of events about the end times all the way to the rise of the Antichrist. So this prophecy, as we mentioned to start with, is really critical to our eschatology. The framework we use to kind of figure out the flow of events leading to Christ's coming.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the Old Testament with prophets, it's not uncommon for there to be gaps in their speeches, right? I mean, I think it's in Zechariah chapter 10 where you have two verses back to back. One's the first coming of Messiah, the second is the second coming of Messiah. And so there's a huge gap there. And then with minor prophets, it's all the minor prophets seem to have the same theme. Israel, you're bad, you're being judged, God is sending the locusts, but there's going to be a future restoration. And so there's a gap there as well. And so is that a fair assessment that gaps are common in Hebrew literature?
They are particularly in prophecy, though. Not because in the histories there may or may not be. Again, they don't keep a firm hold on chronologies. They're not that interested in that. They have a lot of, like in the book of Numbers, they count things. That's for sure. But that doesn't mean that they want to do everything like on a timeline. That really doesn't fit well in Jewish thinking. Whereas, and one other thing causes gaps in prophetic material. These are all prophets who are sent to one country, Israel. Well, Israel and Judah after it was. But these are God's prophets sent to God's people, Israel. And that means their message is from God. And what kind of perspective does God have about chronology? Well, he says 1,000 years is as a day and a day is 1,000 years. Time really has zero impact on God. And often when he is giving a prophet material about the future, well, you're going to run into a gap problem with God being the spokesman, the author, because timelines are not big thing. He sees the future as sometimes as if it's already fulfilled, occurred, done. And he describes it that way in those terms, even though it hasn't happened yet. Why does he write that way? Because God sees future events as it's a done deal.
Yeah.
I'm telling you what's coming, and so past, present, and future from God's perspective are rather fuzzy, where we as human beings, we're born, we live, we die, we're very time oriented.
Yeah, definitely. It's part of the holiness of God as far as him being set apart and distinct from his creation. And so in essence, God is always present, if you will.
Even his name. He
I
says,
am.
Oh, yeah, tells Moses, tell him that I am sent you. It's like, what?
Not I was, not I will.
I am, I will be. Yeah.
That is good. And I like the Hebrew word for that too. If I'm not mistaken, the Hebrew word is hayah.
Hayah. Huh?
So like, make me think of karate.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the name Yahweh, which the Jews refuse to use, they say Jehovah for the second word, just to keep God's real name holy. That means the I am. That's the very meaning of the Yahweh.
What do they call it? The Tetragrammaton or something like that. But
where they swapped out the vowels.
Right. But the next one is in Revelation 10. So we're stepping forward a little bit. Revelation 10, verse 13. This is one of my favorite passages in the book of Daniel because it says something interesting. In verse 13, it says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So here we get an account where it's Gabriel speaking, and Gabriel says that the king of Persia withstood Gabriel. Is this a human ruler that's fighting with angels? Is this like Constantine movie, or what is this? What is this Prince of Persia?
Okay, the context is important, and you kind of described it. Gabriel is the one speaking to Daniel. He's explaining to Daniel why it took him 3 weeks to get there in answer to his prayer. Because he says, I left the day you started praying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And normally, there isn't any delay. If God sends an angel, they show up.
Right. Yeah.
It's rather instant. So, and Gabriel says, but the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me. And then he mentions Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the keys to understanding who the prince of Persia would be, because of the mention of Michael. So it's Gabriel talking. We know him as probably not your average angel or your average messenger. Mm-hmm. He got some really privileged assignments, like meeting and talking with Mary and Joseph and so on. There's some really big time stuff he does. Elizabeth and John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. So there, he's not your average angel. And then he mentions Michael, one of the chief princes. And I think there's another verse, I don't have it on top of my head, that explains a bit more about Michael. It may not even be in Daniel, but we know in the New Testament there's some references to Michael, like in the book of Jude, that he durst not bring a railing accusation against the devil when he was wrestling with Satan over Moses' body up on the mountain. So we know Michael as the archangel. I'd like to call him like a 5-star general of the army of heaven. So he's one of the chief princes. He didn't call him a king there, but a chief prince, which again, that would fit a general of some sort. So since it's Gabriel talking and Michael had to help him, it gives us a little context, and that's helpful. Then there's the fact, when you look at Persian governmental organization, there was not one prince over Persia. There was many. Okay. Therefore, that Gabriel didn't say that, though. He says the prince of the kingdom of Persia. Since he's saying it in the singular, we're not talking about a human being that was prince of Persia. Sorry, I don't mean to antagonize those that like the movie, the Prince of Persia. Hey, there isn't just one prince, and there wasn't one in that movie either. There were several. And anyway, back in reality here, there wasn't just one prince of Persia. There was many. And since there's just one here, we can assume, okay, he's not talking about one of the princes of the kingdom itself. Gabriel's battle was then with a prince of darkness, like Paul mentions in Ephesians 6. We wrestle against principalities, powers, and rulers of the darkness of this world. So the prince of Persia, in my opinion, was a demon who resisted Gabriel for 3 weeks, who had to tap somebody in to come into the ring and help him. And it was the archangel Michael, and he finally escaped him. And of course, he says he's got to go back and fight some more when he finishes up with Daniel. He says, I'm going to leave, go fight him some more. So I think it is a fascinating one. I love anything about where the Bible teaches us about angels, gives us a little glimpse of the reality that's invisible to our naked eye of the spiritual world that's right here where we live. And there are battles going on that we can't even see.
No, definitely. Moving to Daniel chapter 12, the last chapter in the book of Daniel. There's a reference to certain days. I'm just going to read the 2 verses in Daniel 12, 11 and 12. It says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So 1,290 days. Then in verse 12, he says, blessed is he that waiteth and comes to the 1,335 days. So here we get an aspect of 1,290 days and 1,335 days. There's a gap of 45 days there. what are these days, and why is somebody blessed if they wait until this 1335th day?
There's one other numbering, but it's a more common one back in verse 7, where it says, for a time, times, and a half, which is a reference to 3.5 years, which is half of the tribulation period for the Antichrist, since he gets 7 years until God says, time out, you're done, sends Christ back. So it's the 3.5 years are numbered back in verse 7, and that's 1,260 days when you count out 30 days in a Jewish month and 12 of those in a year. They did do an adjustment occasionally, but you don't count them in the biblical side. So the Lord provides that number, and it was in verse 7 was an answer to verse 6, where Daniel asks the angel, how long shall it be to
the end of these wonders?
The end of the wonders. And then verse 7 describes the 3.5 years from the second half of the tribulation, ending with the Battle of Armageddon, which is in Revelation 19:19. So it's a common tribulation number. The 3.5 years or 1,260 days is found in Revelation. It's found in several prophecies. So that one's not a surprise. We could use that as a main numbering, typical numbering. Verse 11 now he switches up though, and it's additional time frame. It gives you 1,290 days now in verse 11, where he mentions the abomination that maketh desolate. The Lord provided this number to Daniel. That's right. An angel doesn't, these are not an angel's answer. This is where the Lord appears. The Lord provides this number to Daniel in answer to the question he asked in verse 8. Oh, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? So he specifically asked a good question. And verse 8 describes the second half of the tribulation from the Antichrist declaration to be God. We find that in Revelation 13, all the way until the judgment of Israel. That's in Revelation 20, verse 4. I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. So this is another prophesied time frame going from before the beginning of the millennial kingdom. That comes up in Revelation 20 also. So I won't say exactly what's going to fit in that, because I'll give you that at the end. I'll deal next with the extra long one, 1335, verse 12. Now this one is not connected to a question. The other two are. Daniel asks a question, the Lord gives him an answer and a number. There's no question that this one's based on. There's a blessing it's based on. So he says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to that number, 1,335 days. It's a prophetic blessing on those who will enter the millennial kingdom of Christ. And Revelation chapter 20 and verse 6 gives you a very similar blessing. It says, blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So if you include the 1,260 in the three numbers there, you have a total of 75 days from the 1,260 to if you include the 1,260 in the three counts, and that are added at the end of the prophecy regarding the 7-year tribulation. So the extra time then is a transition. You stop with the Antichrist being conquered and slain, and you're going to begin everything else with the millennial kingdom. Now, so what this is suggesting is there's a time gap between those two events, the overcoming of the Antichrist by Christ himself and the beginning of the millennial reign of Jesus on earth. And in that gap, we can only guess. The transition could include some other events that seem to fit that gap. The judgment of the Antichrist and his false prophet, that's in Revelation 19:20. The post-Armageddon judgment is mentioned in 19:21, the remnant that were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse. And then the post-war cleanup. It's a bloody battle There's a prophecy about blood coming out of a wine press, even unto a horse's bridles by the space of 1,600 furlong. That's from Revelation 20. So there's going to be some post-war cleanup, very messy, and that's going to take a good number of days. Satan has to be bound for 1,000 years before the beginning of the millennial kingdom. So that's got to happen. I think God has a sense of humor. He just sends an angel to lock him up. That cracks me up. Because like Jesus doesn't lock him up. No, he just sent an angel with the chain.
Take care of my light work.
Yeah, it's great. And he bound him for 1,000 years. So that needs to happen. And then there's the judgment of Israel. And it's just indirectly referred to in verse 4 about the thrones and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I would put it there only because the focus of the millennial kingdom is on Israel, just as the 7 years of tribulation. You get 2 witnesses, they're Jews. You have 144,000 who are sealed, they're all Jews. So how can we deny it's a Jewish time frame? We've moved on to the era. And when you get to the 7 years of the tribulation, and nonetheless, and then the resurrection of the tribulation believers is also prophesied. That again in verse 4, before we get to the beginning of the kingdoms, he says, I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and they lived and they reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So there's some specifics. We're not saying that's all who's going to be there, because once we're raptured, Jesus says, you'll be with me always. And Jesus is going to be ruling here on earth. I'm going to assume we must be there as well after we receive our bodies like his. Look forward to that. This old one's wearing out.
Now, I like how you parallel Revelation, like you said earlier, that Daniel and Revelation are really complementary, supplementary, if you will. And so definitely. So with the book of Daniel, one of the last questions I have is, why do you think God gave us this book in the canon? What purpose does it serve today?
Well, this prophecy provides an inside look at the 7 years of captivity, and it's written by someone who lived them from almost day one, and that's pretty valuable, especially to the Jews. It provides many prophecies about Israel regarding the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the rebuilding of the temple, the miraculous birth of the Messiah. So there's stuff that again the Jews would be greatly interested in. And remember, these prophecies were given to Daniel, who's a Jew. It provides dozens of prophecies about Jesus, and that's where Christians really come in, Jews and Gentiles now, because there's a prophecy about his first coming, about his crucifixion, about the coming of the Antichrist, about Christ's second coming, and about the establishment of Christ's kingdom on earth. That's all huge eschatological stuff for us. So that makes Daniel just invaluable now for believers today. And now much of that our Jewish friends would struggle with unless they become Messianic Jews. But there's some great stuff all for believers right there. And then Daniel provides wonderful examples of faith, of miraculous events. One of my favorites is the fiery furnace. The king himself was an eyewitness. All of the accusers of Shadrach and his friends were there, and they were all eyewitnesses of everything that happened. It's just a wild testimony of a miracle recorded in the Bible. It's like Christ's resurrection. Over 500 were witness of Jesus alive again, walking around talking to them. Well, that makes that what a wonderful miracle. Well, I love the fire furnace, and there's some great testimony. And then Daniel is mentioned. The prophet Ezekiel mentions Daniel in chapter 14 and chapter 28. Jesus himself quotes from Daniel in Matthew 24:15. He talks about the abomination of desolation, and he says, spoken of by the Daniel the prophet. So I love that. Why not study it? What a great book.
Now, in that last thing you just said, Jesus said, written by Daniel. If anybody on this earth would know if Daniel is a pseudepigraphical work or if it's an actual authentic work, Jesus would, and he attributes it to Daniel.
Yeah, he didn't say, well, somebody like Daniel.
Exactly. Yes.
Daniel the prophet, not the fibber.
Yeah, not me, not this Daniel. So, where can people buy this book? Where can they find it?
Uh, Generally speaking, on Amazon. I think there's a few other places that Zulon sends them to as well. I've not really researched that out. Amazon is so easy to order from. And the prices change, by the way. It's kind of high right now. But if you watch for a while, every once in a while, the price drops. And that's a good time to buy if you can't afford the paper copy. It's also available on the Kindle. And not everybody uses that, but you can get a free Kindle app for your laptop or desktop. You don't have to buy anything like a Kindle itself,
Device, yeah.
Kindle Fire, I think they call it. So you don't have to buy any kind of hardware. You can use it on your laptop or your desktop and use Kindle. If you there's some, I used to subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, where you could just kind of, you can keep up to like 10 books. And then when you get past that, you have to turn one in. So anyway, through Kindle Unlimited, this is available as well. That's my first time trying that, and I hope it spreads it around. There's a lot of countries on the list that actually offer Kindle Unlimited in their country. So I thought, well, that'd be nice.
Yep.
So it's available there, and links are available on Pastor Danny's going to put on the bottom of this video a link over to was it to Daniel or to the? Or
we'll have Daniel, Revelation, Barefoot Bible, and if you wanted, well, you said the website's not up anymore. Is that right?
It was coming up for renewal, and the use of it was very limited. So I thought I would just include everything you need on the Barefoot Bible YouTube channel. So right on the opening page, when you get in, you'll see a thing about links, and it's down at kind of the opening description at the bottom of it. It'll say 7 links, and if you click on that, they all come up.
We'll have all that on the descriptions here. I have one last question.
Okay.
If your wife said you were any animal, what animal would your wife tell you that you are? And why do you think she would think you're that animal?
I don't know, to be philosophical with this or what. When she first met me, I had a collection of frogs, every kind of frog statue or things, As a kid, I used to bring home frogs like every other day. Tell my mom, I probably threatened to kill me if I didn't quit doing it. So I just love frogs. I thought they were so cool. And so I had all these collections. I don't have them anymore, don't worry. But I even had one pair of green shoes. I remember I showed her. She was not impressed with that. I don't know if she'd say I'm a frog. Probably not anymore. Oh my goodness, what would I be if I asked her? It probably would not be something real good. Yeah, it might be some kind of a dog, and I'm not sure which one she'd pick. She likes dogs, So
she likes you.
She has a Chihuahua, so it wouldn't be. I wouldn't be a Chihuahua. I'd have to be something else, probably a hound or something.
You make a lot of noise. It is.
But that question has never come up. Thank you, Danny. That's great.
Well, I've learned something about you. You like frogs.
The other thing, if you would ask me what kind of animal would I say she is, I would say I refuse to answer based on my life depends on it. So don't go there. I don't want to guess.
No, I wouldn't put your life in jeopardy like that. Although you could say she'd be like a dove because she's so spiritual and so wonderful and such a great comforter. And
okay, I could get real points. Yeah, and I can use points.
That's good. You'll have to find out. You have to ask her, what kind of animal am I? and
And
see
what
what
I'd
you
be, okay.
found.
Inquiring minds want to know. There you go.
Yes. All right. Well, I appreciate the time with you, David, and everybody else out there. Head over to Amazon, find this book, whether Kindle Unlimited or just paperback copy, order it. It's a great book to have for your library. It's a good reference material, and it's written in the way that you can read it cover to cover. Not a lot of commentaries are like that. And so go ahead and check that out. Like I said, links will be in the descriptions below. Like, share, comment, blah, 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 blah. And until next time, God bless.